But I can see that already quite a lot of you here. So yeah, just for the next couple of minutes, have a think about the starter task whilst we wait for everybody else. Oh, we've got a fan of the Kahoot. Unfortunately, this week there's not going to be a Kahoot. I will try most weeks, but I thought this week we're expanding what we did last week. So I thought we'd scrap the Kahoot, and I knew that this week's session was going to be shorter because we were supposed to start at 10 past. So I thought I wouldn't have time for the Kahoot, but I promise I'll bring it back next week. I'm glad the Kahoot has landed well, though. That's good. Okay, welcome to you who are just joining. Just to reiterate, we're supposed to start officially at 10 past. So for the next couple of minutes, think about this starter activity. How is my day? Oh, I'm very good, thank you. My day was very nice. I've just been working, so yeah, nothing too special. I hope everyone else had a really nice day though. Yeah, we'll give it one more minute. Any plans for half term? No, I'm still working, unfortunately. When you're an adult, life doesn't stop. That's yeah. Just excited because the last week till half term. Nice. Anyone got any of you got any nice plans for half term? At least you're still getting money. Yeah, that is true. That is very true. Okay, right. So we're officially meant to be starting at 10 past, but there are already a few people here. So we'll make a start on this starter activity. Last week, I introduced you to this idea of how to write about the effect on the reader, and I gave you the acronym of FALTS. Feel, ask, understand, link, think, sympathize. All verbs you could use to describe the effect on the reader. And just for you who haven't arrived, I'm sorry there's no Kahoot. This week's a shorter session because we're starting at 10 past. So technically it's 50 minutes rather than an hour. So I didn't make a Kahoot this week, but I will do next week, I promise. So, any answers in the chat? Anyone feel confident enough to use any of these verbs to describe how this sentence, the house shivered as the wind crept through the cracks, affects them as a reader? How might it make you feel emotionally? What kind of questions might it make you ask? What might you be able to understand from that sentence? Does it link in any way to any bigger themes or ideas? Does it make you think of anything in particular? Do you sympathize with anything about this sentence? Um, yeah, does anyone have any answers? If not, it's absolutely fine. I'll put my answers, the things that I came up with. These are the ones that I came up with earlier. So we use this acronym to describe the effect on the reader. So personally, for me, I said any of these could work completely fine. So it could make you feel uneasy, could make you feel tense, fearful, some sort of isolation, loneliness, trapped, a sense of struggle, any sort of thing within that realm. Like I said last week, there's no one correct answer when it's the effect on the reader. So it really is a personal thing to you. As long as you can justify your answer, it's correct technically. Any kind of things that you might be able to ask from this? Well, for me, I would think what might have caused this feeling. Why is did I change this? I changed the style activity, my bad. I actually changed it to I'm tied to a stake, but bear like must fight the corpse. I just didn't change the original slide, my bad. So if this was the sentence, I might have thought, what might have caused this feeling? Why is he so determined? I might have been able to understand how how that metaphor that he uses made him feel. He feels fearless, determined, willing to struggle against the odds. I could link it to wider themes, guilt, violence, ambition. Things that it would make me think about is how the writer is presenting the consequences of immoral acts. And then, yes, I would argue we do sympathize. So that's just an example, thinking about from last week, how we use those. Right, let's make an official start because it is coming up to 10 past. So last week we looked at this idea that language is the choice of words, specifically that a writer makes. And we looked at how writing uses language within fiction. And I said when you study how language is used in a story, you should begin by reading it closely and paying attention to the details. And we looked last week at this idea of atmosphere and the effect on the reader. So we're going to kind of continue looking at this today, expanding on it using different language devices. But I quickly just want to reiterate to you some basics from last week. So when I say affecting, it just means when one thing happens that causes another thing. So for example, if it rains, that's going to cause me to get wet. If I eat a lot of sugar, that might cause me to get teeth cavities or cavities in my teeth. And I said to you, an effect doesn't have to be positive or negative. It could be either. So we looked at this idea of connotations, and I introduced you to this word. This is when a word has a suggested sort of meaning to it beyond its literal definition. So it's the thing that it makes you think or feel or what you associate to this word. So the example I gave you was blue. Literally, that's a color. But the word or the sort of noun or the adjective of blue might have further associations beyond the literal meaning. So for example, if someone's feeling blue, it suggests sadness or loneliness. Other examples I gave you were like home. Yes, literally, it's a house, it's a building. But figuratively, it's a place of comfort, somewhere I associate with safety. Snake literally is an animal, but figuratively represents danger, betrayal, sneakiness. And then a rose, yes, literally is a flower, but figuratively represents love and beauty. And this is kind of what we looked at last week, where we said a word connotation is made by what it makes the reader think and feel. And we looked at it in terms of symbolism a couple of weeks ago. And these are the examples of symbolism that I gave you back then. I said a mockingjay, for example, from the Hunger Games, might represent rebellion, hope, and resistance. And when I talk about symbols, if you remember back, that's just when an object or an image figuratively represents something beyond its literal meaning. So we looked at this example of conch shell from Lord of the Flies. Yes, literally, it is just a shell, but it might hold deeper meaning that might represent something. And in the Lord of the Flies, it represents ideas of laws or law, order, and civilization. Similarly, with blood in Macbeth, yes, physically, it's the liquid that goes around our body, but it might figuratively represent bigger ideas, for example, guilt, violence, moral corruption. And we kind of looked at symbolism linked to connotation. So what things do we associate with these words beyond their literal meanings? And then we looked at this. We looked at how to explain the effect on the reader using this acronym of feel, ask, understand, link, think, and sympathize. So I kind of want to start building on these today. So as we go on for the next few weeks, I'm going to slowly start introducing more and more language devices. And today specifically, we're going to look at similes, metaphors, and personification. We're going to ignore onomatopoeia for today because it's a shorter session. So the reason I've grouped these words together is because it builds on this idea of connotation. They all rely on careful word choice to create meaning. Words carry connotations, the feelings, images, ideas that suggest beyond their literal meaning. And all of these devices work because writers choose words with specific associations. The stronger the connection between the words and its connotation, the more powerful its effect. So I've grouped these together because they all rely on connotation and symbolism to represent meaning. So I left a tip at the bottom. When analyzing, ask why did the writer choose this word? What feelings or ideas does it suggest? Welcome to you guys that are just entering now. So we're going to start with similes, and hopefully this should be pretty easy revision for you in terms of what a simile actually is. But it's just when you compare two different things using the words like or as in order to create or represent a deeper meaning. So why does word choice matter when it comes to similes? Well, it's this idea of connotations. Every word has these feelings that we associate with it, these thoughts that make us, these associations that we have with words. And the impact of the simile depends on these associations. And we're going to look at this today. And in terms of connecting to symbolism, a simile can suggest deeper ideas or themes through these associations. So, for example, her smile was like the sun. Her smile here has been compared to the sun. And the sun here is the specific choice of word that's been made. And we should have connotations or associations to the word sun. It should make us think or feel a certain way. So to me, it represents warmth, light, hope, happiness, that sort of thing. Positivity, life. So this specific word here in a simile gives us connotations that should help us to work out why that simile has been made and what it's telling us. And then linking to this idea of atmosphere from last week as well. We also looked at atmosphere, and atmosphere is just the mood that is created, the emotion that is created by the word choice. So a simile compares two things to help the reader imagine a scene or feeling. The words chosen in a simile shape the mood or atmosphere of the text. So how word choice affects the reader? Well, just to reiterate, words carry associations that suggest certain thoughts and feelings to us. And the simile guides the reader to feel, and I've highlighted the word feel, a certain way about the character, place, or event. Because an atmosphere is the emotion that we're made to feel. So an example would be, the night was as black as coal, swallowing the village whole. Well, if we focus on this simile here, the black as coal, what do we associate with the words black, coal, swallowing? Well, to me, that has associations of darkness, danger, and fear. And the atmosphere, the sort of emotions that it might create, is it might cause me to feel quite tense or frightened or intrigued by mystery. So when analysing, ask what feeling does the simile create? How do the specific words chosen affect or shape the reader's experience? Will we ever do like a writing task for homework or a creative writing? Yes, I will get you to do one at some point, if that's what you would like to do. So just to reiterate from last week, I gave you examples of atmospheres, ones that are quite common that I would recommend learning because they would be useful to use in your answers. Like I said, there's no right or wrong. As long as you can justify your choice and which atmosphere you think is fitting to the question or the sentence, that's a right answer. So for example, I've divided these by subsections. So I've gone tense, cold, so sad, warm or positive, ambiguous or complex. So I would use these. And then I also added to our list of list of feelings that I gave from last week. And I added subsections of positive, negative, neutral, and intense feelings for you as well. But as I said, I just want to reiterate, there's no right or wrong answer. As long as you can justify how a sentence makes you feel, then there's no wrong answer. But I want to speed on a little bit because it's a shorter session today. So how would you actually analyze a simile and the effect on the reader? Well, I've split it down into four steps. Firstly, should be pretty obvious, but identify the simile. Make sure that it is a simile that you're actually analyzing. So look for those words, like or as, when you're comparing two things. So for example, I said her eyes were like the ocean. The like there tells you it's a simile. Consider the specific choice of words used. In this instance, it's the ocean. It's comparing her eyes to the ocean. So I'd start to think about why the specific choice of ocean has been used. What are the connotations? What's the symbolism? What does it make you think and feel? To me, the ocean makes me think of like vastness, deep, mysterious, quite powerful. And so I then think about what's the atmosphere? What's the emotion being created? And then I'd link to further themes if there are any, and what does it actually tell us about a character or scene? And ask, why did the writer choose this particular comparison? Because there will always be a reason. The writer is always trying to get us to think and feel a specific thing. So, examples could be describing the sky, because this is what we're going to look at today. How changing the simile completely changes what we know about what's being described, or how we feel about what's being described. So the thing that's staying the same here is the sky. We're comparing the sky in different ways. So, for example, firstly, I might describe it as being like a golden blanket. Now, to me, this idea of golden and blanket gives me connotations of warmth and comfort, calmness, safety. Whereas if I changed it to something like a fire compared to a blanket, that's going to completely change how I'm analyzing this simile. Because fire has different connotations and associations to blankets. Whereas with blanket, we had warmth, comfort, calm, and safety. I associate fire with danger, intensity, heat, pain, energy, fear, very different things to a blanket. And so the use of the simile is different. I might describe it as a grey prison compared to a fire and blanket. Well, what do I think of when I think of prisons? I think it's quite gloomy. I feel trapped. I feel oppressed. I feel sad. Again, very different to the first two effects that we had. And then if it was like a diamond, I associate with beauty and wonder and awe. So the choice of the specific words wildly affects the connotations that result from the simile and how you might analyze that simile. And then another example, I also went with describing the mind. So his mind was like a stormy sea. I take that and I think about, why has the storm and the sea been used? What do I think about and what do I feel when someone mentions a stormy sea? Well, to me, it represents chaos, confusion, some sort of strong emotions, turbulent thoughts. Whereas if it was like a library, that's very contrasting to a stormy sea. What do I think of when I think of libraries? Well, it's much more organized. It's much more calm compared to this storm, which brings chaos. If someone's mind is like a library, it might tell me they're quite clever because I know that a library has lots of books, which contain lots of knowledge. She might be quite thoughtful, again, relating to the idea that a library has lots of books. If her mind or his mind was related to a locked box, what might I associate with that? Well, secrecy. I don't know what's inside the box, so therefore I'm intrigued. There's a mystery there. The fact it's locked suggests it's maybe private or closed off. So I hope you're starting to see how changing the simile really changes the effect and the analysis that we can do. And I'll do the cage to finish off. So what do I think of when I think of cages? Well, I think of being trapped, restricted, confined. How would I feel if I was in a cage? Well, I'd feel quite anxious. There may be quite limited space in there. So that's how I would begin to break down the effect of the reader based on the simile. So what we're going to do is, like last week, we're going to go through some of these. And I want to see your answers in the chat. You're normally quite active, so I want to continue the streak that we had last week because there was loads of you participating and it was really, really cool. So it'd be really nice to see that again. So what I want you to do is think about, what are the connotations? What does it make you think of? What does it make you feel? And the atmosphere. What emotions are created from this sentence? And I hope you notice we're going to do the ship. So I'm going to compare the ship to different things using different similes. So firstly, the ship glided like a dancer in the wind. What does the word dancer make you think? What does it make you feel? What might it tell you about the ship if it's been compared to a dancer based on its connotations? I can see this message. It is sailing smooth. Yeah, definitely. I think this idea of being a dancer, I think you have connotations of it being quite smooth in the way that it moves, almost quite fluid in the way that it moves. There's definitely a level of control there. Because when I think of a dancer, I think of somebody who's had lots of training, who's very controlled in their movements. Dancer being steered a lot, smooth and elegant. Yeah, I like this. There's repeated talk of smooth and elegance. Absolutely. What about the atmosphere? How might it make you feel? And what does it tell us about the ship? Because you've got the connotations, right? We're talking about smooth, elegance, control. All these are the right words. What about what does it tell us about the ship's journey? Someone said it makes me feel calm. Oh, I love that. Calm is a really nice word to describe this. Or it could be fun. Swift. Yeah, definitely. Fast. Yeah, absolutely. No storm. Yeah, all of these are good answers. So to me, this is what I said. I think there's connotations. Apart from fluidity, I saw every single one of these words in the chat, so well done. There's a sense of elegance, control, and beauty there. When I think of a dancer, I think of somebody who's very controlled in their movements. And to me, I think it makes you feel almost inspired, quite calm. I think it tells me that the journey is very smooth. There's no problems. And it almost suggests, I put harmony with the sea. This sim that almost symbolizes grace under pressure and mystery of challenges. Okay, what about if I change the simile and I said the ship drifted like a leaf on the water? What would the connotations be? What would the deeper meaning be? What would it make you feel in the atmosphere? How does that change the simile? Okay, so suggests that the ship is very slow. Yeah, possibly very slow. Certainly quite calm, because there's no urgency from a leaf that's being sort of pulled very gently along top of the water. Someone said gliding, quiet, drifts, slow turns. The atmosphere is. Oh, see, now this is really nice. Somebody said that the atmosphere is quite lonely. I hadn't really thought about it like that, but that is a really nice way to think about it. It's almost like a lone leaf, kind of on its own journey. Weightless, that's nice. Yeah, these are all great. What might it tell us about the ship? Because you're getting some really nice words in terms of the connotations and the atmosphere. But what does it tell us about the ship's journey? Someone said long, old, it's light. Yes, possibly. Well, these are the ones that I went for. I think I've seen some really nice ones in the chat. But I went for these. I think it symbolizes some kind of like somebody said loneliness, and I think loneliness is within being passive. I think that was a really nice way to describe it. I put being fragile, so like it's easily breakable. Lots of you said calm and smooth, so I think that comes under the category of gentle. Somebody said simple journey. Oh, I like that. I hadn't thought about it like that, but absolutely, it's quite a simple journey. That's really nice. And I put it suggests vulnerability and helplessness against the vastness of the sea, symbolizing surrender or being carried by fate. But that's not to say that's the only answer, because I've seen some really nice ones in this chat. I really, really liked the one about loneliness. I thought that was a really, really, really good point. And for the atmosphere, I said calm, delicate, peaceful. But I think lonely is a really nice one in there as well. And somebody said simple journey, and I love that. That's such a good summarization. This simple journey, I really like that. Okay. The ship buckled like a wild stallion. It's being described as a horse or a fast moving, sudden moving horse. How might that shape how we describe the ship's journey? What might the connotations be? How does it make you feel? And what does it tell us about the ship? Somebody said fast. Yeah, I like that. Speeding. Absolutely. I definitely think there's quick movements here being alluded to. Um, a stallion is a type of horse, like a racing horse. Someone says ominous. Oh, I like that. Why do you say ominous? Why do you think the atmosphere is ominous? Someone said chaos. Oh, I like that. Yeah, yeah. This idea of being untamed almost, the chaos, the unpredictability of chaos is really lovely. Somebody said crowded. Yeah, 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 absolutely. Fast and loud. Possibly there's a storm. All of these are really nice. Let's think about the atmosphere. How does it make you feel? Because somebody said ominous. That's the only atmosphere I've had so far. Someone said overstimulating. Oh, I hadn't thought about it like that, but that's really, really lovely. So we've had ominous and overstimulating. Any other feelings that it might inspire from anybody? Energy, like energetic, nice. So was a tense. Yeah, yeah, definitely tense. These are the ones that I went for. I think there is ideas surrounding power and unpredictability. So when somebody said chaos, I think that comes under that. This idea of being untamed and energetic, but there's some really nice ones in there as well. Deeper meaning, I said it highlights the uncontrollable forces of nature. It's almost like I imagine the ship to have sort of like bolted a little bit, like it's kind of buckled under the weight of itself. Definitely fast paced. Somebody said energetics, that was really nice. Loads of people said tens as well. I went for thrilling, adventure, anything along those lines. I think all of those are really nice. Okay, we'll do another one. The ship thrashed like a wounded beast. This is the last one we'll do before we move on. Think about wounded beast, not just a beast, but something that's wounded. What does that make you think of? How does that make you feel? And what does it tell you about the ship's journey? Somebody said unsafe. Yeah, absolutely. I think this. Let's pick apart this idea of beast. So we said like the Titanic. Yeah, 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 definitely like the Titanic. Dark, unstable, violent. Oh, I like that. I think you've picked that out of the thrash. Definitely, there's an element of violence here. Dramatic, unpredictable, broken, eerie, a sinking ship, lost in battle. All of these are brilliant. I think you're picking out the essence that I also went for. So I used words like pain, desperation, aggression, hopelessness, defeat, vulnerability, but people are also picking similar words. Someone said lost. Ooh, that's a lovely way to think about this. I said it suggests a fierce but ultimately losing struggle against overwhelming forces, symbolizing conflict, resistance, and the inevitability of defeat. And the feelings that it makes, to me, are chaotic, desperation, menacing, tragic, mournful. But again, I've seen some lovely ones, like Lost was a really nice one. Broken, eerie, dramatic, violent, unstable. All of these are brilliant words I think are correct in this ballpark. So that was our similes then. Um, Very similar to similes, we've got our metaphors. And metaphors also compare two things, except they do it without using the word like or as. And instead, they say something is or was something else. So why word choice matters in metaphors? Well, very similar to similes, every word has associations and feelings associated with it. And writers choose these words carefully so that the metaphor evokes emotion, theme, and symbolism. So my examples that I went for from metaphors, time is a thief. Picking apart this word thief, what does it make me think of? Well, it's someone that steals. So if we're saying that time is stealing, to me, that's suggesting that time is like taking moments from our lives, almost telling me how quick time is if it's taking things away from me. Almost like it's taking possible future experiences away from me as well. The classroom was a zoo. So picking apart this word zoo, well, I think of chaos. I think of unpredictability. I think of a lack of control, something very noisy and loud. And then his heart is a locked box. So again, thinking about this locked box almost being quite secretive. Or his heart, if we're thinking about specifically the heart, suggests that he's maybe emotionally closed off. So I guess that's worth pointing out. Is yes, we have to think about these words. We also have to think about the context of which it's being compared to. So locked box by itself makes me think secrecy. But in terms of the context of the heart, which is what's being compared, that makes me think that the person is secretive or emotionally closed off. So you've got to think about the context of also what's being compared. 2. Okay, so analyzing metaphors then. Very similar to a simile. Um, look, identify, that's meant to say metaphor. Look for is, were, or are rather than like and as. So, for example, her eyes were an ocean. Again, very similar to the simile. Think about those connotations. What do the words make you feel? What do they make you think? So when I think of ocean, I think vastness, deep, mysterious, powerful. And then how do they make you feel? Again, linking to the themes or deeper meanings. I think it's very worth comparing similes to metaphors because they are very similar things. Both of them compare between two things, except I would say one is stronger than the other. And I think there are times when using either is better than using the other. So I said both similes and metaphors compare things. They use imagery and symbolism created through the connotations of the certain compared words to convey ideas and emotions. So I've got a little table of comparisons. I said a simile uses like or as, metaphor makes a direct comparison. To me, a simile feels gentler and more obvious. And you see what I mean in a second. Whereas a metaphor, I think you use for stronger comparisons. If you want to convey stronger emotions, stronger associations, I think you use a metaphor. So the example here is her voice was like music, or her voice was music. Though the sort of noun music doesn't change, I think they both convey slightly different things. I'm going to ask you really quickly in the chat before I show you. How do those things differ in what they suggest to you? Why might using a simile versus a metaphor create different connotations, different feelings? What do each of those make you think? So her voice was like music and her voice was music. Do they tell you different things about her? I want to see some answers in the chat. Just I want to get your initial thoughts. What do those two sentences make you think and feel, and how are they different? Because there is a very slight difference. Okay, someone said, simile is more accurate and understandable for me, but metaphors are a little complicated. That is a personal thing, and I understand why. Metaphors are harder to spot, but I do think they are useful when you use them. One is saying that it's like the thing, and another saying that it is literally that. I want to talk you through it because I think you're missing the point. Yes, one is saying like, one is saying is, or was rather, but I think they convey different things. They tell me different things about her voice. So when you say someone's voice is like music, to me that has connotations of being quite pleasant, quite enjoyable, almost gives me quite a light, calm atmosphere, a tone that's maybe affectionate or admiring. The reader sees her voice as soothing and rhythmic, but instills happiness in anyone who hears it. But I think if you use a metaphor and say it was music, I think it's stronger. It's instilling some stronger feelings than saying it's like music. Being like music is not saying it is, it's saying that it's like a weak connection. Whereas if something is something else, you're physically comparing those two things directly. And so there's a stronger connotation that's created there. So I said the direct comparison suggests her voice is pure beauty or art itself. Whereas up here, it's like nice to listen to, it's calm, it's affectionate, it's admiring. This is passion. I think it creates a more magical or romantic atmosphere. The tone is intensely emotional. Whereas up here, it's like affectionate or admiring. This is intense passion. And so the reader sees her voice as transformative or enchanting, which tells us how deeply the narrator feels about the woman. As we view music as a necessary part of daily life, it is addictive. How deeply in love with her, so he is deeply in love with her and cannot live without her. He's infatuated. So I think the difference here is this person is feeling very passionate, very deeply about her voice. Whereas this person is affectionate, it's admiring. He still kind of fancies her, but it's not deeply affectionate, it's not passionate. I think that's the difference between a simile and a metaphor. A metaphor is passion itself. And so I said both compare her voice to music, but the metaphor deepens the emotional impact, changing the tone and atmosphere and making the reader feel more awe or wonder. There's a deeper meaning there. So I gave some examples of metaphors like I did with similes, but I want to skip through these and answer the questions. Very similar to what we did with similes. Let's spend a few minutes on these. So again, I want the connotations. What do they make you think of? What do they make you feel? The atmospheres that are created. And what does it tell you about the city? These are all going to be about the city. So firstly, the city was a labyrinth. What does it tell you about that city? What do we associate with labyrinth? Confusion and being lost. Absolutely. Someone else said confusing. I think you've hit the nail on the head right there. I think this idea of complexity. Someone said a maze. Yes. Anything else? What about the atmospheres? Lots of people are saying confusion. I think that's a brilliant word to think about this. What about if you got lost in the maze? How would you feel then? Someone said puzzled, unsure. Blocked. Block's a nice way to think about it. Is any other higher level words to use than blocked? Perplexed. Someone said scared because you might not find your way out, because you might get trapped. Trapped is a nice way to think about it. This idea of being isolated. What about the deeper meaning? What does it tell you about the city? Because you're getting, again, you're getting the connotations really nice. You're getting the atmospheres really nice, the feelings. But what does it tell you about that city on a deeper level? So was there claustrophobia, not easy to locate, endless with secrets. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think let's go down this secret road. So I said it makes me think of mystery, complexity, hidden truth, isolation, entrapment. So someone said lost. That's really nice. Someone said secrets. Someone said confusion, fear. All of those are great. Um, the deeper meaning, I said it suggests intrigue, danger, or complexity. Like someone directly said that it hides secrets, and I agree. I think it hides stories and secrets and surprises at every corner. It's possibly like a prison that traps you. And then I think the way that it makes you feel is sort of a sense of mystery and tension, fear and isolation. So everything you said was really nice. Okay, the city was a velvet crown. Pick apart this idea of crown and then the velvet. How might that change it? Again, the connotations, what it makes you think and feel, the atmosphere, and then the city. What it tells you about the city. Someone said rich. Oh, I love it. Yeah. This idea of wealth, definitely in the crown and velvet. The darkness. I think velvet does have connotations of being almost associated with, again, secrets and darkness. A wealthy place in someone's hands, absolutely. Giving them a minute on this. These answers are all lovely, and I really appreciate again your joining in. The participation is really nice. It was like a precious jewel filled with hidden treasure. Oh, again, this idea of wealth, this importance that you place onto it, like a jewel. And the hidden treasure is really nice as well. Okay. Anything else before we go through this? Fine, if not. Okay. I'll show you what I said about this. So I said it has connotations I associate with almost luxury, this idea of being a velvet crown. Elegance, the velvet. Velvet is a very expensive material. The prestige, the richness, it makes me feel almost majestic. The fact that it's the city that's a velvet crown to me is quite alluring. It's almost pulling me in, making me want to go. I said the city exudes subtle wealth and sophistication. Its power and allure are refined rather than flashy. Okay, and then we'll do one more. The city was a predator stalking the night. Think about this idea of an animal predator is what is being described as here. Why is that interesting? Somebody said scary city, dark city, menacing. Yeah, I think all of these words are absolutely right. Anything else? Dictatorship? Yeah, possibly. I love that. I haven't really thought about it like that. Like a dictatorship is really nice. Uh, predation, yeah. Yeah, all these nice. I'll show you what I got. So I said I associated it with danger, almost menacing. Um, I said the deeper meaning is it suggests that the city is alive. I mean, it's literally been compared to a live animal, and it's almost threatening. It can overwhelm or consume, therefore reflecting the harshness of urban life. And I said the atmosphere is one that's quite menacing. I think somebody said that in the chat. Somebody said menacing, tense, foreboding. Okay, so I'm giving you one question on metaphors versus similes then, just so we kind of get this. Because there's a difference. We said that similes are weaker, metaphors are stronger versions. So the one I've given you here is the forest was like a dying flame versus the forest was a dying flame. Start with the simile. How might the simile, or what might the simile tell us about the forest? It's a bit weaker. What do you associate with the dying fire being the forest? Um, Somebody said weakness and human destruction. Yeah, I really like that. Weakness, this idea of human destruction. Ooh, that's a really nice way to think about it. I think that's really good for a metaphor, but similarly, I would say is a bit weaker than that. I'll show you what I got for a simile, and then we can discuss more about the metaphor. So I think when I think of a fire, because it's not saying that it is a fire, it's saying it's like a dying fire. So the reason it's softer is because we're thinking about the qualities of a fire without saying that it is something. So what do you associate with fire? To me, I think it's like warmth, light, beauty, but also destruction at the end of something. And so I take those qualities without actually applying the deepness to it. And so to me, it suggests that the forest is quite beautiful, but temporary, because somebody said destruction. Its colours burn brightly before fading away, just as fire does before it dies. And to me, that similarly creates a gentle descriptive image that the forest resembles a fire, but it still feels natural and separate from it. And to me, that atmosphere is quite peaceful, quite wistful, quite nostalgic. The forest feels calm and fading rather than alive or threatening. But what about a metaphor? Because a metaphor is stronger. That's what you get when you say it's like a dying fire. But what about the fact it was a dying fire? What might you get then for the metaphor? So, because somebody said human destruction, human cruelness. I think that's a lovely way to think about it. That's kind of very similar to what I said. I thought it was to do with destruction, but I hadn't really thought about it like human cruelness. But I think it's a really nice way to think about it. And so I said the metaphor turns the forest into a fire, making it feel alive and symbolic, as though nature itself is burning out in a final burst of color and energy. And I think the way that it changes the effect is that it feels more powerful and emotional, gives the forest personality, deeper symbolism about change, loss, renewal, and the atmosphere changes to something quite intense, almost quite sad and melancholic. Thinking about human cruelness, for example. Okay, right, I'm going to quickly move on for our last 10 minutes. To look at personification. Now, this is the last technique we'll look at today. And this is when a non-human thing is given human characteristics, qualities, or actions. And it helps the reader connect emotionally to objects, places, or ideas by making them seem alive or relatable. So why do we use personification in writing? Well, it creates quite vivid imagery, almost makes the description of things quite engaging. And we do it to build an atmosphere, to build these emotions that it makes you feel, and also to suggest themes as well. So the examples that I went for is the wind whispered through the trees. Now, whispering is a human quality. Wind can't literally do this. So we're giving it human-related qualities. So we've got to think, what might that represent? What does that tell us? What connotations does the whispered have? But to me, it suggests like secrecy, mystery, something that's almost quite ominous. The sun smiled down on the field. What connotations do I link to smiling? Well, to me, that's like warmth, happiness, peace. The city never sleeps. Well, literally, the city's not alive. It can't sleep. So what do I associate with insomnia, not sleeping? Well, the opposite, energy, movement, constant life. The house groaned in the storm. Thinking about this word of groan, this verb, what might that suggest to me? Well, it suggests fear. The house might be old, that there's some tension there. So picking apart the connotations of the words used to personify. So very similar to metaphors and similes, how do we analyze personification? Well, identify that there is personification. Has something non-human been given human characteristics? So for example, trees dancing. They can't literally dance. Humans can. Then explore the choice of the words. Why has it been compared to dancing? How does that make you feel? So I want to quickly do some of these in our last 9 minutes together. We might only get through 2 or 3, but I want to think about these. So same again, think about the connotations. What does it make you think? What's the feeling, the atmosphere? And what does it tell you about the clock in these examples? The clock whispered softly. So somebody said, let's see, mystery, somebody said. I think, yeah, mystery definitely comes into this. What about let's pick apart the whispered and softly. What does that make you think of? When a human does that, what does it make you think of? Someone said magical, secretive. Yeah, absolutely. Secrecy is a really great one. Warmth. Any more? Mystery. Yeah, absolutely. So again, you're getting the good connotations, but what does that tell us about the clock? If the clock is whispering, what does it tell us about the clock? What does that tell us about time? Gives the impression of secrecy. Yeah, lovely. So I said whispered suggests quietness, gentleness, and secrecy. And so you can see secrecy came up a few times in the chat. Someone said ticking. Deeper meaning. I said this personification makes time feel quite peaceful. Because the idea of soft whispering, I don't think it's a harsh description. I said as if is slipping by quietly, almost unnoticed. It might reflect a moment of calm or stillness where time feels delicate and human. And to me, the atmosphere feels quite tranquil, quite reflective. Very calm, definitely no sort of negative associations there. Okay, the clock marched on mercilessly. So I pick apart these words, the verb of marched and the adverb of mercilessly. Mercilessly. What does that make you think and feel? And what does that tell us about time? Someone said in sync. Oh, I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah, that's a really nice way to think about it. What about marching? What kind of associations do we have with the word marching? And then merciless, meaning not giving in despite suffering. Somebody said danger, and the clock is merciless. Yeah, I think it is quite a dangerous thing. Linking it to time, how does it make time feel? Like, how would that affect our perception of time if time was marching on mercilessly? Someone said swift, strict, adamant. It doesn't stop, it's stubborn. See, we're getting it. Furious. Yeah, very much we're getting it. Okay. So to me, march is just order, control, power, determination. Almost unstoppable. And somebody said that, and I really liked it. So thinking about how we relate it to time, it makes time feel like it's relentless, it's ongoing, it's stubborn, it's not stopping. It doesn't stop or pause for anybody. And to me, that feels quite tense. Almost, almost makes me feel a little bit existential because it's reminding me of the inevitability of time moving forward, that it's unstoppable, that we can't pause our lives. And so the feelings that are associated with that. Okay, we're going to do one more and then I'll give you a homework and then that's us done for today. So the clock watched patiently from the wall. Let's pick apart the word watching, for instance, then patiently from the wall. What does that make you think of? Um, the clock goes slowly. Yes, definitely this idea of slower pacing, because it's the idea of patient, waiting. Yeah, somebody said slow as well. I agree. Observant. Ooh, I like it. Why might it be watching? How would that make you feel if you knew that there was always a presence on the wall just watching you? Mysterious, somebody said. I agree. Would you feel uncomfortable in a way that something is watching you? And if so, why would something be watching you? Somebody said it just watches you waiting forever, never moving, uncomfortable. Yep, absolutely. It's a bit creepy, knowing the clock knows your every move. Yeah. So this is what I went for. I think picking apart the word watched, somebody said observant, and I agree. Almost suggesting that it's waiting in judgment, like it's watching you. Would definitely make me feel very uneasy in the way that I felt. Almost like time is ever present, monitoring everything. It's alive and knowing, symbolizing the constant awareness of passing time. It could represent self-consciousness, guilt, the pressure of being observed by time. So I hope you're starting to realize that connotations kind of help to analyze language. And when you get to GCSE, this is what you get marked on. So it's good to start building these skills now. Like last week, I've got an extract for you to do. Again, it's optional. You don't have to do it, but if you do want to do it, I would recommend it because I think it's very helpful. So this is the extract for this week. This session is recorded, so you can go back and look for it if you want it. I'll give you 30 seconds just to take it now if you want to do it before I give you the questions. I will warn you though, there are some new vocabulary questions on this that we are going to start adding to our vocabulary list. So if you don't do this homework, you might be left a little confused in next week's Kahoot quiz with our new words we're going to start adding to our vocabulary list. Right, these are the questions. If you want them, about, again, very similar to what we've just done, picking out the connotations, the feelings, the meanings behind similes, metaphors, and personification. And then the defining of the words. Okay, so these words may or may not come up on next week's Kahoot. Okay, they are found in the text. So using our skills that we started to build last year, can you work out what they mean if you don't know already? Okay, cool, right. 2 more minutes. If anyone wants to stay for GCSE, again, you're always welcome to every week. But otherwise, have a nice week. Sorry, it's been a bit shorter today. A little bit of admin, I should probably say, is your parents should be getting emails that these sessions are going to move to 7:15 from now on, purely because of the classes we have before this session. Right, so have a nice week. Right. Hello to everyone who's just entered for our stage 4 GCSE session. How is everyone this week? Has anyone done anything interesting this week? Has everyone had a good week? Okay, right. Let's make a start. Do a little cool. Right. Let's go do a little admin before we start. You should be getting an email, but from next week, these sessions will be 7:15 to 9:15. Purely because of the session we have before this, it's quite difficult to start this one on time normally. So, yeah, you should be getting an email about that. But anyway, I want to press on because you asked for this. You wanted a paper one exam session. So I'm here to provide. Um, so we're going to think about today how to get higher marks on this paper. I want to give you a little note before we start. I'm not going to be telling you what to write. That's what I've been doing for the last few months. I've been giving you all of the content of Macbeth. So this is purely going to be exam tips, how to structure paragraphs, where you get the marks. So paper one structure, it looks like this. You get a section A and you get a section B, and it comprises 40% of your total GCSE literature score. That's for both AQA and Edexcel. So in Shakespeare, in section A, you get given an extract from the play that you studied, which in this case will be Macbeth if that's the one you've done. And you'll be given an extract to refer to. Similarly, for section B, that'll be your 19th century novel. So for most people, that's Jekyll and Hyde, A Christmas Carol. But there are other variations. And again, you'll be given an extract from somewhere within that novel, and you'll be asked a question about it. So in terms of timings and how that should work for your exam, the full exam is 1 hour 45. So the way that I would divide this is I would do Shakespeare 55 minutes and section B is 50 minutes, giving yourself 5 minutes to plan for each of these. But if you're not a planner and you like to just write, then that's 5 minutes extra writing time for both. Okay. I'm sorry, those times include 5 minutes already. Not bad. In terms of the marks then, the total marks for this paper is 64 marks, whether that's Edexcel or AQA. And that's 30 marks per essay with an extra 4 marks just for the Macbeth or Shakespeare question that you get for your spelling, punctuation, and grammar. And we're not going to cover spelling, punctuation, and grammar today. Now, there's 3 different types of questions that you could get asked about. One is character, one is theme, and the other is context. Most of the time, you'll get asked about something character related. So, for example, how does Shakespeare present Macbeth as a male character who changes throughout the play? You could get asked about a theme, and I've given you those. So, ambition, violence, guilt, power, deception, appearance versus reality, all of those are themes, and you could get asked about how those themes are presented throughout the play. You also could get something about context. And we've looked in detail about context. So it could get asked about the Great Chain of Being. You could get asked about gender, I don't know, the tragic genre, anything about that. These are the ones that you see less than all the others. You tend to find character or theme questions most when it comes to Macbeth. Now, your exam question section A will look like this. It will give you an extract. This one was from 2023, I think. Or this might have been the one from last year, 2024. And it says it tells you where in the play the extract comes from. And it tells you a little summary about what's just happened at this point in the play. So you'll be given an extract from the play and be expected to analyze it before linking it to other moments in the play. It's your ability to connect ideas and themes. So in terms of this, it will say something like, starting with this speech, explore how Shakespeare presents ambition in Macbeth. So this is an example of a theme question, specifically relating to ambition. But I said it could be most likely theme or character. And it's important that you have to start with this extract. But it doesn't mean you have to write your whole question about this extract. Normally, it's just one of your 3/4 paragraphs. But one of them has to be about this extract. And then it will say, write about how Shakespeare presents ambition in this speech and how Shakespeare presents ambition in the play as a whole. So you must then expand to the rest of the play and analyze quotes and moments that link to this one. Okay, I want to press on with marks. So you get marks based on assessment objectives. So you might have seen before AOs, and I've given you these repeatedly when I've been giving you the analysis. These are ways that exam boards measure and quantify students' essay writing skills, and they are the same across AQA and Edexcel. So no matter which exam board you do, the way that you're getting marked is exactly the same. So I want to quickly define these because I've kind of given you them over the last few months, but I don't know if you're familiar with what they actually are. So assessment objective 1, AO1, comprises 37.5% of your mark, which is 12 out of 30 for each essay, which is quite a big portion. And what it expects you to do is to read and understand and respond to text. So this is what AQA and Edexcel have said. Students should be able to maintain a critical style and develop an informed personal response. Use textual references, including quotations, to support and illustrate interpretations. So really what that means is that it's about ideas, evidence, and understanding. And what they're looking for is for you to show a clear understanding of the text, so understand what's going on, and respond to the question with relevant ideas and evidence. Evidence being the quotes that we've looked at endlessly over the past few months. So in order to score highly on this assessment objective, to get that 12 out of 30, it wants you to answer the question directly. So make sure you stay focused to the key word of the question. So in this example, if you don't speak about ambition, then you're not going to get any AO1 marks. You need to directly answer the question. Show understanding of the plot, the characters, and the themes. Use relevant quotations from the text and explain how your evidence supports your point. They're the things that are being assessed on here. Now, in terms of AO2 then, this also comprises 37.5%, which is 12 out of 30 marks. What it wants this time is this is everything to do with language, form, and structure. So the past few months, I've been giving you quotes and I've been picking out language and structural devices. That's exactly what AO2 is. It's asking you to analyze language, form, and structure used by a writer to create meanings and effects. And it's highlighted here that it wants you to use relevant subject terminology, basically meaning have you correctly and accurately identified techniques. So explain how writers use language, form, and structure to create meanings and effects. This is about how the writer tells the story, not just what happens. And we'll look at that in more detail in a second. So just to clear it up for everybody, so everybody's clear what the difference is between language, form, and structure. Language is the specific word choices. Why has Shakespeare used specific words? What is he trying to tell us by using those specific words? So, for example, the bloody instructions, highlighting the word bloody might make you think of violent imagery. Structure is how the writer has organized the play. So what are the order of events? Are there any repetitive moments? Are there any motifs that appear throughout the play? Then form is the type of text. So in Macbeth, you often get soliloquies as a type of form. An aside might be a type of form. Is it written in prose? Is it written in rhyming couplets? That sort of thing. So we should be hopefully by now familiar with AO2 and how to analyze AO2. So in this case, picking out specific words or devices, analyzing what it means to you, and linking it directly to the questions. The example I've given here is Shakespeare's use of the recurring motif of blood, so the adjective bloody presents Macbeth's guilt as blood symbolizes the psychological consequences of his violent actions, suggesting Macbeth cannot escape the consequences of ambition. Somebody says, what is a soliloquy? So a soliloquy you'll find in Shakespearean plays. And it's a moment where the character speaks to the audience. And they often do it when there are no other characters on stage. So it'll just be them on stage and they'll give a really long monologue speech about their internal thoughts. And that's different from an aside. An aside is very similar. It's where they also speak to the audience and they give their internal thoughts, but it happens when other characters are on stage. So it's almost like they're doing it in front of other characters, whereas a soliloquy tends to be private. So thinking about AO3 then real quick. This is 15% of the marks. So it's only 6 out of 30 of those marks. But this is everything to do with context. So AO3 is showing understanding of context in which the text was written, and its impact on the meaning of the text. So I'm going to show you in a second how to structure a paragraph. The AO3 is related specifically to not only context, but the writer's intentions. What is the meaning of using context and what effect does it have? AO3 asks you to link the text to its social, historical, and cultural context. And I've given you these extensively over the past few months. So in terms of Macbeth, this is our great chain of being, our divine right of kings, our tragic hero, the Holinshed Chronicles, what people believed about witches, that kind of thing. And so this is what AQA and Edexcel said. They said this will measure how students understand the relationship between the text and the context in which they were written. These include relevant, historical, social, and biographical information. And note that the key word here is relevant, and we'll come back onto that. Okay. I'm going to skip over introduction because I want come back to this if you find it interesting, but I would think there's more useful things to cover in the time that we have today. Okay, I want to show you how to analyze and structure a paragraph in an essay that will get you higher marks. Your analysis paragraphs, these should make up the bulk of your essay. And what I would suggest is for the 30 marks to do 3 or 4 paragraphs. Now, this is the main chance you get to showcase your essay skills and prove that your argument that you stated in the introduction. Again, sorry that I skipped over introduction, but I think there's a lot to cover today, and I think it's there for you if you need it. So what you should include in these paragraphs when you write them is a topic sentence that signposts where in the play you are talking about and what your argument is. So this is your point that you're making. Relevant quotes, analysis of language and or structure, correct subject terminology, possibly alternative interpretations if you're looking to get the sort of grade 8 and 9, relevant context, links to the effect on the reader, and links to the writer's purpose. So I want to leave you with a checklist like that. Every time you write a paragraph for an English literature essay, these are the things that should be in there, and you should treat this like a checklist. Every time you write one of these, check it off. Make sure that you're ticking off everything required to meet the marks that I just showed you. Now, in the past, I have showed you this, and some of you might be familiar with this acronym of PTEC. This is a way to remember how to structure a paragraph. Point, evidence, terminology, explain, and context. And I've told you to aim for 3 or 4 PTEC paragraphs. Now, I thought about this a little bit, and I thought I really wanted to break this down so it's more understandable of how better to structure an essay. So yes, I think PTEC is good, but I think there's better. And I came up with one on my own. It's not brilliant, but I think it will help you. So the one that I came up with is think about the structure of a paragraph like Pete W. Curl. This is our man. He's our character right now, Pete W. Curl. And each of these letters that are in capital represent a different thing. Very similar to our PTEC, This is my version of PTEC, and I think it should help you make sure you're really ticking off the checklist of points that I showed you. So I said point, evidence, terminology, explain. Before I go to the C, context, I think writer's intentions, then the context, links to the reader, how it makes the reader feel, and we'll cover this later, and then a link back to the question to show that you're linking directly to the question. So you're getting the AO1 marks. So we're going to start to pick this apart and look at how to get those higher mark questions. But quickly, I want to go through an example just so I can show you what I mean. This is how I would structure a paragraph. So points, I'd have a sentence that explains your point. So for example, Shakespeare presents violence in Macbeth as a powerful but destructive force that corrupts those who use it. That would be an argument, my point. That's my AO1. Evidence. This is shown when Macbeth declares, I am in blood stepped in so far that should I wade no more, returning were it tedious to go over. So I provided a quotation to back up my point. Terminology. This is where AO2 comes in, starting to pick apart the language and structural devices. So I said Shakespeare uses a hyperbolic metaphor of wading through blood. I've picked out the hyperbole and the metaphor. They're my two language devices. Then I've gone and explained it to convey Macbeth's psychological entrapment resulting from violence. The verb, which technically is terminology, wade has connotations of struggle and difficulty, creating a haunted image that suggests Macbeth is overwhelmed by his own brutality, showing how violence is metaphorically consuming his identity to the point he feels physically and mentally hindered. Okay, so that's so far our Pete. Thinking then about how we can expand our Pete W. curl effect on the reader. So the audience would feel disturbed and fearful as they begin to understand how ambition can drive someone to lose all moral restraint and therefore sympathize, as I say, with his intense struggle. Linking to the context, getting our AO3 marks. For a Jacobean audience, excessive violence, such as regicide, would have been seen as a violation of the great chain of being, symbolizing rebellion against the divine order. Then linking to the writer's intentions. Therefore, Shakespeare is warning his audience about the corrupting nature of ambition and the moral chaos that follows when individuals disrupt the natural and social order through violence. And finishing with a link back to the question to show the examiner that I'm really directly answering this question. So therefore, Shakespeare presents violence as both physically destructive and spiritually ruinous, reinforcing its devastating impact throughout the play. So I've used my Pete W. curl to structure directly sentence after sentence of this paragraph. Because I thought the reason the PTEC isn't very good is because it's not structuring you sentence by sentence, whereas I think mine gives you sentence by sentence how to write this paragraph. Point, evidence, terminology, explanation, links to the reader, context, writer, link back to the question. So the question we're going to look at today is how does Shakespeare present ambition in Macbeth? And this is a question that came up in 2017. So I want to show you first and foremost a low mark answer, something that would only get a grade 3, just to give you a baseline of where we're at here. So whilst I'm reading this, think about why this is not a very good answer. Thinking about everything I've told you about how to get the marks. Shakespeare shows that ambition can make people do bad things. At first, Macbeth seems loyal, but when the witches tell him he will be king, he wants the crown and thinks about killing Duncan. The noun king shows what he wants. This shows that ambition is making him think about murder. The audience might feel shocked that someone who was brave and loyal can start planning a crime. In Shakespeare's time, people thought killing the king was very wrong. Shakespeare wants to show that ambition can be dangerous and make people do bad things. This means that ambition in the play is shown as causing trouble and bad consequences. Now, I've purposefully used my Pete W. curl structure here, just so that I've got a sentence for every sort of point. But these are low-grade versions of these sentences. So, thinking about firstly our AO1, why is this low marking? Well, although it does show a basic understanding of the storyline, in terms of that violence is a bad thing, the argument that it's making is relatively simple and repetitive, that violence is bad. It doesn't really expand or give us very detailed insights. It also doesn't really link to deeper ideas about corruption and morality. And it only uses one short quote that will be king. In terms of the AO2, why does it score bad? Well, there's very little language and structural analysis here. All it's done is the noun king. So yes, it does provide a quote and it does begin to analyze language. It's very limited in the way that it does this. There's no mention of any language or structural devices. It's very basic in the noun. There's also no real subject terminology, so there's no similes, metaphors, hyperbole, exaggeration, all that sort of thing. And the effect on the reader is very basic. The fact that the audience feels shocked. Like they have done it, but it's very limited in their explanation. And then in terms of context, yes, they kind of have begun to add in context that people thought killing the king was wrong, but it's very shallow and again very limited. It doesn't feel like it's necessarily relevant to the answer. And the writer's purpose feels very generic as well, not very heavily or tightly linked to the question about ambition. So let's begin to think about how to build on this answer. How can we make it from a grade 3 to a grade 8 or 9? Thinking firstly about our AO1. As I go through, I've compiled some tips and tricks to boost your answer. And I want you to keep this session on hand. I even go away and make notes on this. So just reminding us about AO1, I've linked it to my Pete W. Curl structure. This is our point and our evidence. And then I'll link back at the end. So, reminder, it's about interpretation. It's about giving a point. It's about your argument and then giving quotes to back it up. So, I've highlighted in colors what the point and evidence is here. But I'm just going to skip this. So, in terms of our example, this was the low grade AO1. Shakespeare shows that ambition can make people do bad things. At first, Macbeth seems loyal, but when the witches tell him he will be king, he wants the crown and thinks about killing Duncan. Now, this is low grade AO1 because it's not very detailed. There's no deeper analysis. Yes, they have used a quote, but it's very shallow, it's very short, and it's only one singular quote. And the point that they've made is not very detailed or high level. So what can we actually do to improve the point and the evidence part of your Pete W. Curl structure? Well, firstly, developing an actual argument. And the way that I would do this is opening your essay with a strong, focused idea. It has to be directly linked to the question, which in this case is about ambition. So Shakespeare presents Macbeth's ambition as a force that drives and both destroys him. That's a much stronger opening than it can make people do bad things. It's much more focused. It's much stronger in the way that it conveys its point. Everything you should write links back to the main idea, should link back directly to the question. In terms of developing an argument, I would build on linked paragraphs. Each paragraph in your argument should be a new stage of your argument. Each paragraph should be a new point. So firstly, Macbeth's ambition begins as heroic. That could be one point. A second paragraph could be ambition becomes corrupted by power. That could be a second point. And then a third point could be ambition leads to guilt and downfall. Every paragraph here is linked directly to ambition, but they're saying something new about ambition each time. And I've given you some linking phrases that I think would be very useful just to show that you're using AO1 to get that sort of grade 8 and 9. So, furthermore, in contrast, similarly, however, this development suggests, for higher marks, your ideas should flow and connect with one another between the paragraphs to show that you're developing an argument. In terms of developing an argument, yes, each paragraph should be a new point, but they should also never repeat. You should only develop on your previous idea. So moving from simple observation to deeper interpretation. So the one that was quite low here was quite a simple interpretation that people do bad things. Can we make this deeper or expand in this in any way? Think about motives. Why does a character act this way? Why does Macbeth get driven by ambition? Yes, it can make someone do bad things, but can we go deeper? Why? How is that showed? What's the consequence of the bad thing that you're talking about? And what's the wider meaning? Why is Shakespeare talking about ambition? Why has he written a play about ambition? All of this is to do with developing an argument that's solidly linked to the question. You could also heighten your AO1 using quotes. So the example that we saw only used one very short quote that was "will be king." Whereas top grade essays don't rely on one quotation. They connect several to build a cohesive, developed argument. And the reason that we do this is because it shows that you have a wide knowledge of the text. You don't just rely on "will be king." Can you support that with any other quotes? Can you link ideas, different moments in the play? It doesn't have to be two quotes from the same scene. It could be two quotes from different scenes that suggest similar things or show change. It's all to do with developing an argument, building on the last thing that you said. You should be able to show, having multiple quotes shows a controlled, clear line of reasoning. So what AQA have said is, in order to score highly in this assessment objectives, students are expected to maintain a critical and judicious writing style. Do not just employ loads of quotes just because you have memorized them all. Make sure that they are relevant and that you analyze instead of just simply placing them there. So I guess that is a caveat. Yes, use multiple quotes, but don't just put in quotes for the sake of it. Put in ones that directly link to the question, that are relevant, that you can talk about, that support your points. And then also thinking about quotes. How to connect quotes? Well, firstly, I would try to avoid really long ones. Try to pick segments of long quotes to make them a little smaller. And I'd use small, precise quotes from different parts of the text, potentially 2 to 3 per paragraph, showing how they relate. Do they support each other? Do they contrast each other? Is there any repetition between quotes? So yes, use multiple quotes, but make sure they're relevant and relate to each other in some way to show that you're building an argument. You're not just throwing things in for the sake of it. You're making a point and really hammering it home with multiple quotes, building on the last thing that you said. So if you use one quote, use a second one and show how it supports what you've just said and how it maybe strengthens what you've just said or maybe contrasts what you've said. So I would use a connective to tie them together. So for example, earlier in the play, Macbeth said X, Y, and Z. Later in the play, this changes when Macbeth says X, Y, and Z. This is echoed when. Similarly, in contrast, this idea returns when. At first, Macbeth calls, for example, I've used an example here. At first, Macbeth calls ambition his vaulting ambition, suggesting he recognizes its danger. Yet later, he describes himself as steeped in blood so far, showing how that same ambition traps him in guilt and violence. Shakespeare therefore presents ambition as a progressive corruption, not a single moment of weakness. So you see what I've done there? I've taken two separate quotes from different acts of the play, but I've used them to build my point. But I've said ambition represents one thing, but then it's used later to show something else. And I've built on that idea. So I've given an example of a high-level AO1 point then. So this is how I would change that original paragraph. Shakespeare presents ambition in Macbeth as an unnatural and self-destructive force that corrupts both mind and morality. Now, early in the play, Macbeth seems honourable, but once he begins to desire the crown, his ambition becomes uncontrollable. This is shown when he admits that he has no spur to prick the sides of his intent, but only vaulting ambition. Then I would obviously do some analysis, and then I'd support that by saying this point is reinforced later after he has committed regicide. When Macbeth says, I am blood stepped and so far that I should wade, that should I wade no more, Returning was tedious and go over. So how many quotes are required per paragraph to establish higher grades? I did 2 to 3. I think any more than that is overkill. I don't think you need more than 3 per paragraph. And I really think 2 is the optimum prime, nice optimum level. But 3 never hurt anybody if you really, really want to go into detail. Someone said, do you just do 2 separate paragraphs, but the last one isn't very long? I would do 3 Pete W. Curl paragraphs. All of them just as long, as detailed as each other. Okay, so thinking about AO2 then. This is our terminology and our explain of our Pete W. Curl acronym. Reminding ourselves of what this was. This was language and structural analysis. And I've given you an example of what I mean by that. This is thinking about zooming in and out on specific language and structural choices. So everything I've showed you over the past few months, every time I picked out a quote, I always picked out language and structural devices. And I told you what it showed you about that quote. So in terms of AO2, we need to make sure that we use specific and accurate terminology, explaining why the specific word choices, the specific language devices, the specific structural devices have been used, and what the effects are relating specifically back to the question, which in our example is about ambition. So I said Shakespeare used the metaphor. Notice the terminology I've highlighted in yellow. A vaulting ambition which overleaps itself, to suggest that ambition is dangerous and self-destructive. The verb overleaps implies an uncontrollable force that goes too far, reflecting how Macbeth's desire for power will cause him to overstep moral boundaries and ultimately fall. Shakespeare also uses fricative consonants, where the repeated V sound creates a harsh, forceful tone, emphasizing the destructive and violent energy of unchecked ambition to foreshadow Macbeth's fall, presenting it as inevitable. So notice I've used a fair number of terminology, of terms here. I've used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you don't need 5, but I think per paragraph we should be aiming for 3, I would say, per paragraph. And I've been through in the past, if you've been with me for a while now, you remember my sessions on tone and atmosphere, and I'll come on to this in a second when we look at our AO2 tips. But including tone and atmosphere is a really nice way of boosting the amount of terms you use in a paragraph. So he said, are you giving quotes in the exam? No, you're expected to go in there and have memorized quotes. Somebody said, what does the U stand for in Pete W. Curl? This is a flaw in my system. You just ignore the U. I wanted it to sound nice. That's a flaw in my system. Okay, so I said, and you've seen this before, I am begging you, please analyze language and structure. The amount of essays I read for English literature where people don't analyze language and structure is more than you would think. Now, this is 12 marks. 12 marks out of your 30. If you don't analyze language and structure, that's limiting massively those 12 marks. You'll be getting more of a grade 3 response like you saw before. So please analyze language and structure, because people don't. People forget you have to do that, and you do. You have to do it. So if you've been with me for my Key Stage 3 sessions, we looked recently at connotations, and I kind of just wanted to re-highlight that here, just to remind people of the basics of English, of how to analyze language. So connotation is when a word has associations to it. So how a word makes you feel, what it makes you think, are there any ideas that it brings to your head? Words don't just necessarily have to be literal. They can have figurative meanings as well. So for example, blue is literally a color, but it represents bigger ideas. If someone's feeling blue, it suggests sadness and loneliness. So things can have figurative meanings beyond the literal. And this is all about language analysis. This is what language analysis is. It's about thinking about why the specific word choices have been made. What do they make you think? What do they make you feel? So, for example, let's pick the snake analogy. Literally, a snake is an animal, but it might represent ideas of danger, betrayal, sneakiness. Same with the rose. Literally, it's a flower, but it might represent ideas of love and beauty. So, words connotation is made by what it makes the reader think of and feel. And I want to highlight that I'm not going through language and structure in this lecture in this session because there's no time. But those of you who've been with me will remember when we did this back last year. And if you are someone who really struggles with how to analyze language and structure, I would recommend you come to my Key Stage 3 classes because that's what we're doing at the minute. I'm showing you how to analyze language and structure and how to link to the effect on the reader. But I have given you some examples of terminology you could use here. And you should be familiar with all of these from over my Macbeth sessions because I've used all of these at some point. So looking at the low grade AO2, in my low grade answer, it was the noun king shows what he wants. This shows that ambition is making him think about murder. The audience might feel shocked that someone who is brave and loyal can start planning a crime. Now, I said this was low AO2 because all they've done is said noun. That's a very limited amount of analysis. And then their link to the reader is very basic as well. They feel shocked. And the reason it's got 3 is because, yes, they have done it, but it's very limited. So how can we get that grade 7+ mark for AO2? Avoid irrelevant terms. The examiners don't want to just see adjectives, nouns, verbs. They want to see language and structural devices. They want these. They don't want adjective bloody. They want these. They want these higher level, accurately selected terms. So instead of the adjective bloody shows its violence, the reoccurring motif of blood in the violent imagery of the adjective bloody conveys Macbeth's inner guilt and the corrupting power of ambition as it symbolizes the psychological consequences resulting from Macbeth's physical and violent actions. So yes, you can still mention adjectives, nouns, verbs, but use them in conjunction with higher level terms because these are the ones that are going to get you the higher marks, not the adjectives and nouns, it's these ones. So please include them. And hopefully from my previous sessions, you should be very familiar with that because that's all I've done when I've analyzed quotes is pick out the higher level ones. But not just picking out relevant terms, use multiple terms. Use more than one accurate term in a single point, shows depth of understanding, pushes your marks to the top bands. And the reason is it shows that you can analyze multiple layers of effect. So in this low grade answer, they picked out one noun. Whereas really what we want to be seeing is this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 right there. That's nice. That's a really nice amount. It shows that you could analyze in depth and detail. So how to do it? Identify a short, precise quote, identify 2 to 3 devices in the same quote, and explain how each device contributes to meaning, mood, and structure. So very much like AO1 and quotes, don't just throw them in for the sake of it. Make sure they're relevant, that they're directly linked to the question, that they're directly answering the question. Make sure you're explaining how each of those devices contributes to meaning, mood, or character. And always link the analysis back to the question. So, for example, I said, out damn spot, out I say, from Lady Macbeth. Things you could pick out here is the exclamatory dialogue. There's exclamation marks. There's repetition of the out and out. There's the imagery of the noun spots, this idea of it symbolizing moral strain and conscience. There's a panic tone. There's at least 5 there that you can pick out. So use multiple terms. Don't just pick one. So don't just say outs repeated. Say yes, outs repeated, but it creates a panic tone. That's a second one. Expand on that and say the imagery of the noun goes further because it symbolizes the moral strain, which explains her panicked tone. So link them all together. Now, also, if you've been coming to my Key Stage 3 sessions, you'd be familiar with this. Now, effect on the reader is technically AO1 slash AO2. It's a grey area, really. But either way, it's AO1 slash AO2. And this is part of our Peak W curl structure. The way that the way that I'm giving you to help you think about talking about the effect on the reader is using this acronym of FALTS. I'm not sure if your school teaches this or not. But I say one way to explain the effect of the writer's choices on the reader is to choose a precise word from this list and make the effect clear. By working through these verbs, you can unpick the effect of language in detail. So, in terms of thinking about how it affects the reader, how does it make you feel? Is there any emotions that are brought up by the quote? Asking, are there any questions that the quote has made you think of? Has the quote helped you to understand anything about the character, about how the character's behavior, why the character behaves the way that they do, how the character's feeling, how the character's thinking, understanding? Does it link in any way to themes? Does it make you think a certain thing? Does it cause you to sympathize with any characters? Using any of those words are really good to help you explain the effect on the reader. So I've given an example that I gave to my year 7s and 8s. The old man shuffled along the icy street, his coat threadbare and his hands trembling. So using these words, I've given examples of what you could say. We feel a sense of worry and concern for the old man as he struggles along the cold street. That's the effect on the reader. We ask why he is out in such harsh weather and what might be happening to him. We understand from the description of the threadbare coat and trembling hands that he is poor and vulnerable. We can link his situation to the wider theme of loneliness and hardship. We think about how difficult it must be to face the cold without proper clothing. Finally, we sympathize with him, imagining how frightened and uncontrollable he must feel. Now, you do not have to use all of these. I'm really saying use one. Every time you write a sentence about the effect on the reader, choose one of these verbs and use it to talk about how the quote affects the reader. Does it make you feel any emotion? Does it bring any questions up? Does it help you to understand how the character behaves or why the character behaves in a certain way? Does it link to any themes? Does it make you think anything? And does it cause you to sympathize? Okay. So AO2, I've linked to effect of the reader for now. So high-grade AO2 answers don't just identify devices, they explain their effect on the reader. So showing the effect of the reader, showing insight into atmosphere, tone, and emotional impact. So tip, this is what I would do. In order to boost the amount of AO2 terms that you use, I think it's easier to always try and include either atmosphere or tone within your explanations of how the quote affects the reader, because technically they are both language devices, so they will get you terminology marks. So for example, they have tied me to a stake, I cannot fly, but bear-like, I must fight the course. Remember, this was from Act 5, Scene 7. So the metaphor of being tied to a stake and bear-like creates a tense and claustrophobic atmosphere, which is the emotion created, that conveys a sense of isolation and entrapment, making the reader feel Macbeth's sense of inescapable struggle and sympathize with the intense pressure he faces despite his previous tyrannous violence that ultimately triggered this demise. Now, you don't need to include this next part, but I've included it for example for you guys. This links to the moral message of the play, as Macbeth's suffering would serve to warn the audience to not overstep their God-given place, otherwise there will be dire spiritual and psychological consequences. Macbeth broke the great chain of being and is suffering for the consequences of overstepping his place in the cosmic hierarchy and spiraling towards tragic downfall. So that's just examples of how I would use those words to explain the effect of the reader. Linking to atmosphere and tone, which will get you terminology marks. And I've also gone ahead and given you some examples of atmospheres, just in case anyone's unsure. But when you're thinking about the effect on the reader, it's always worth thinking about how would you feel if you were in that situation? If you're really struggling with the effect on the reader, as I said, come to my Key Stage 3 sessions. I'll help you out. But also, how would you feel if you were in that situation? How would you feel witnessing a friend do that? How would you feel if the person in power was doing that? Put yourself into the situation and let the personal response navigate you. And again, I've given you some examples of emotions you might feel, but hopefully these should be self-explanatory to you. There's no right or wrong answer. As long as you can justify how you feel, that's a correct answer. So, yeah, these are not limited to just these emotions. If writing makes you feel something, that's fine. It doesn't have to be one of these emotions, as long as you can justify it. Okay, so the high grade mark for AO2 then, if we're improving AO2. And this would be a sort of grade 8 or 9 answer. Now, I admit I've gone a bit heavy on this example. You don't need, I'd say something 2/3 as long as this is perfect, but I've really just gone to town on this just so that it's clear what the skills are that are required. Because I put into practice every single tip that I've just given you. So again, there's no need for it to be this long, but I really just wanted for an example to you guys so that it's clear to really hammer this home. So Shakespeare's metaphor of ambition as a horse that vaults too far connotes recklessness and unnaturalness, suggesting that ambition overleaps boundaries leads to ruin. The phrase also reflects juxtaposition between control and chaos, as Macbeth recognizes his hesitation and immoral nature of his thoughts, yet still gives in to his ambitious desires. In addition to the fricative lexis in spur, prick, and vault, the juxtaposition creates a harsh and eerie tone that mirrors Macbeth's internal conflict and the violent energy of his ambition. This language generates an atmosphere of danger and instability, showing that his craving for power already carries the seed of destruction. The audience would feel both fascination and unease as they begin to question his morality and fear the consequences that would follow if Macbeth loses control. Similarly, for my second quote, the hyperbolic grotesque imagery of Macbeth wading through blood connotes struggle and uses the motif of blood to emphasize an atmosphere of entrapment and isolation. It symbolizes his suffering and guilt as an inescapable consequences of his immoral acts. In comparison to the softer, earlier equine metaphor, this imagery emphasizes his moral decay as a result of that violent energy that birthed from ambition. As such, the audience's fear would heighten as Macbeth entered a cycle of violence, so they would feel uneasy knowing that greater destruction is yet to come. Yet we would also sympathize with his feeling of loneliness and guilt. So I've really gone to town with this. The reason it's a high AO2 is because I've used lots of relevant and accurately named high-level terms. I've also linked two quotes. I've said that this one builds on that one, that I've compared it. I've said that this quote is a much stronger metaphor than this one and how that affects the audience. So I've really gone to town on this. Now, I want to quickly run through. Okay, I want to quickly run through AO3. Apologies if I run 5-10 minutes over. I want to get this done and then we can move on to inspector calls next week. So, context then is AO3, showing understanding of the relationships between text and the context they were written. I'm not going to go over this slide. It's there if you want to go back and read it, but I want to go to the end. I've given you all the context over the past few months. That's the great chain of being, the divine right of kings, the tragic hero, the belief about witches, the Holinshed Chronicles. All of that is contextual information that is marked in our 6 marks of AO3. Now, our low grade that I gave you was in Shakespeare's time, people thought that killing the king was very wrong. Shakespeare wants to show that ambition can be dangerous and make people do bad things. Now, that would be, I think I've been generous in giving it 2. That would possibly be 1. The reason I've given it 2 is because it has tried to link to context. And if this person had done 2 more paragraphs of the same quality, I'd have given it 2. That's something I should have said as well. This is just 1 paragraph. My marks are based on if there was 3 paragraphs of the same quality. And then they've also linked the effect on the writer's intentions as well about what Shakespeare wanted to try and show. So I've said if there were three paragraphs of this quality, two would have been about right. But how can we build on this and get the higher marks? Well, relevance. Everything that you write should be directly and tightly linked to the question. So again, very much similar to quotes and language, don't just throw it in for the sake of it. It has to mean something in relation to the question. So the contextual points you make must be relevant. Therefore, it must link and add to your argument or question. If it doesn't, this will lower your mark. So it has to, like I said in AO1, we need an argument that's building, it's developing. And context has to add to your paragraph. You can't just throw it in for the sake of it. It has to tell the examiner something about your point. So only include context that supports your argument. Don't just fit random facts in for the sake of it. Irrelevant context would be something like the Globe Theatre was built in 1599 and could hold 3,000 people, which shows the theatre was popular in London. Technically, yes, it's correct, but it has nothing to do with my question about ambition. It's irrelevant, and you wouldn't get marks for it. Whereas if I said something like, during James I's reign, the divine right of kings was meant killing a monarch was considered both a sin and a crime, which makes Macbeth regicide shocking and emphasizes the moral consequence of his ambition. That would be relevant because I've linked it directly to ambition. I said it's ambition that's caused his sinful behavior, which at the time was believed to be wrong. And so how that would influence the audience. So that's why it's relevant. So don't just throw in facts, make sure it's linked tightly to the question. Also avoid generalizations. A lot of the time I see this in essays. People throw in random overgeneralized facts. So for example, Victorians were all very strict and moral. Technically, that's not correct. So don't add in fleeting generalizations and don't use words like all people or everyone because that's not correct. It's like saying in this modern world, everyone, I don't know, everyone uses Instagram. Well, not everyone in the world uses Instagram, so that's an incorrect statement. It's not correct. So don't use statements like that. They're very general and they don't really explain the extract or the theme. They don't link directly to the extract. So it could be like all Elizabethan women were controlled by men. Technically, that's not true. Now, the way to get higher marks is make it specific. Focus on particular beliefs, laws, or social expectations that are directly relevant. Link to the character, plot, or audience reaction. So instead of saying all people, say many people, or some, or Jacobean audiences might have seen. Things that aren't fleeting generalizations. So instead of saying everyone feared witches in Jacobean England, say Jacobean audiences were highly suspicious of witchcraft, so the witch's manipulation in Macbeth would have created fear and tension. That's a much better wording for that kind of thing. Okay, the last thing I want to cover today then, so I apologize if I go over by 5 minutes, but I think it'll be useful. AO3, the 6 marks out of 30, are also the intentions of the writer. So writer's intentions are why the writer created the text, what message, theme, or reaction they wanted the audience to understand or feel. So how to link to the writer's intentions? Well, identify the theme or idea, for example, ambition, guilt, power. Explain the message or moral they want the audience to take away. Connect it to the context, how it would have affected the audiences now versus then. And I've given you some example phrases to help you do that. So for example, Shakespeare aims to show the writer may be warning the audience that this reflects the writer's belief that he intends to make the audience feel / realize that. So these are good sentence starters to kind of tell the examiner that you're talking about the writer's intentions. Now, how to score highly on this? Link to the impact. High-grade essays don't just state context and intention for no reason. Don't just throw in facts. Don't just throw in possible ideas. they show how it would have affected the audience at the time. So this demonstrates that you understand the writer's intentions and why and how it would have affected an audience. So in order to do that, we need to consider the audience's beliefs, that what they expected at the time, and how this text exploits or challenges or supports these reactions. And a link back to the theme, character, or extract analysis. So a good example would be something like Macbeth's regicide breaks the natural order, upsetting the great chain of being. Jacobean audiences would have seen this as deeply immoral. And Shakespeare uses this to warn that ambition and rebellion against divine order lead to chaos, guilt, and downfall. So the key sentences there are, we've got some context, and the audiences would have seen this as deeply immoral. That's what they believed. And then the intention was to warn the audience. So all you need for this is a sentence to get this in. But this is our writer. This is our W in Pete W. Curl. And it's our 6 marks of AO3. So again, I just wanted to highlight, think about what it would be like for you if you were watching this play, if you were in this situation. What would you have believed at the time? And how would watching Macbeth perform these scenes, or the actor perform these scenes, challenge your beliefs and what you thought? Put yourself into the situation and imagine. So to finish off, my high grade AO3 example would be something like, for a Jacobean audience, such ambition would have been deeply threatening, as defying the divine right of kings was seen as a sin against God and a disruption of the great chain of being. That's my context. Witnessing Macbeth's tragic fall from grace as a result of his hamartia would have solidified these fears, as Shakespeare uses Macbeth's fall to warn against the dangers of giving into your sinful desires, such as overreaching ambition, suggesting that when desire for power replaces moral duty, chaos and guilt will inevitably follow. So I've put in some context, and I've supported it with how audiences at the time would have felt about what they were watching. And then very finally, I'm not going to spend much time on this, just 1 minute. The Pete W. Curl, the L, link back to the question, which is technically AO1. And the way that I would do this is at the end of every paragraph, I would end with 1 sentence, just linking directly back to the wording of the question. So our question was about how ambition is presented in Macbeth. Well, therefore, Shakespeare presents ambition as a destructive force that drives Macbeth's downfall. Just 1 short sentence that directly shows the examiner that everything you've said has been directly answering the wording of the question. So I'd use keywords from the question within this sentence. I wrap up the paragraph by adding 1 sentence to connect analysis, contexts, and the effect back to the question. And just so everyone is clear, this is a combined version of everything I've just given you. So I'm not going to read it out because I've already read it as I've gone through. But this is a combined version of the high mark AO1, AO2, and AO3 if you want to take it. And again, I want to reinforce that I've gone a bit above and beyond for this. I don't think you need as much as this to get a high mark. But I really just wanted to show you those skills in action here when I wrote this. And I also just want to remind you that this alone would not get you 30 out of 30. But if you wrote 3 paragraphs of this same quality, it would get you 30 out of 30. So if every one of your Pete W. Curl paragraphs was this high quality, then you would get 30 out of 30. Whereas right now, 1 point is not enough to get 30 out of 30. You need at least 3 to 4. Okay, and then I just really want to finish by saying it's all opinion. There's no right or wrong answers when it comes to the effect on the reader. When it comes to justifying your explanation. That's why I don't want to give you answers. I've kind of been doing that for months. I can't give you the answers because it's personal to you. It's about what you take away from the text. It's about what you associate with certain words, how words make you feel on a personal level. If you can justify that opinion, it is correct. And I've linked here although it's not linked for some reason, a link to some grade 9 model answers. If anyone's still struggling, there's a website here that does some really nice grade 9 answers with explanations as well. Not just for Macbeth, but for the 19th century model, the poetry, everything like that is here. So I've linked it if you would find that helpful. So since we finished Macbeth, here's some optional homework. You don't have to do it, but if you do and you want to have a go at writing me a good quality answer, I've given you this extract with this question. Um, if you do want to send me something, I'm happy to mark it. But I please ask that you send me an online typed document. Please don't send me handwritten photos because they're extremely difficult to mark. I want something that I can add comments on. And whereas when you send me a photograph of written work, I can't mark that very well. So it needs to be online documents, please. Again, this is optional, but I thought since we finished Macbeth, if anyone wants to have a go and wants some feedback, if they really struggle with writing, I'll take the time to give you some detailed written feedback. So yeah, if people would like find that helpful, I'm happy to mark things. Okay, whilst I leave this on, I'll check the chat. Sorry, I've not really been reading the chat as I've been going through. But otherwise, you're free to go. But I'm going to stay around for a few more minutes just to check the chat. I hope you found this helpful. I know I've kind of rushed through a lot. I'll also, if you want, I'll go back to the slides on the introduction because I did skip over that, but you are free to go. So if anyone wants to read the slide on the introduction that I skipped over, here you go. Okay. Someone said, "Can I write 6 or 7 paragraphs?" I wouldn't recommend it. I think that's wasting your time. The optimum level is about 3. If you can do 3 detailed paragraphs, that's great. If you can do 4 not so detailed paragraphs, that's cool too. But I think aim for 3 Pete W. Curl high level paragraphs would be really good. Each with multiple quotes, each with 3+ language structural devices. Yeah, that's kind of the optimum range. When answering a question, would you write in first person or third person? I would write in third. There's no rule against first. That you don't get marked down for it. It depends on your writing style. I'd write third because it comes across as confident, in my opinion. I think it conveys a confident tone to write in third person, almost like you're writing facts. Where can we watch these recordings? They're on YouTube. We do put them on YouTube. Or if you contact Mr. Siddiqui, I'm pretty sure he does have them stored, I want to say. Okay. Hi, I have an English mock on Wednesday, and I wanted to ask about question 5. Can I pre-plan my answer and then use the topic of the actual question for the first paragraph? Can I pre-plan my answer and then use the topic of the actual question in my first paragraph and then say it all instead when and do another paragraph on the question at the end? Would this cap my marks and cap me? What exam is this for? Wait, is it English language or English literature? Someone said, please can you send me all the quotations from Macbeth and Inspector Calls for revision, please? Thanks for the lesson because they help me with my test and understanding the text properly. No problem. It's really nice when I get positive feedback because sometimes I do feel like my teaching style doesn't cater to everyone. And sometimes I do feel a bit bad because I talk at you, especially considering the structure of these sessions. They are kind of designed for me to talk at you. I personally don't like doing. I like having interactive sessions. I don't really work well when I'm talking at you. So yeah, I'm glad this helped you. But yeah, what I am planning to do, and I can't promise this, I'm planning to try and make a document that has all the everything that I've been through on. Um, and if I make that, you're happy to have it. If not, all the sessions are recorded, so go back and make your own notes. That's what I encourage on everything that I've said. But I do want to like state as a point is that I have as over the past few months I've gone through a lot of quotes. You don't need all of them. If you don't think you can memorize that many, pick out the ones that you think are most important and kind of learn those analysis points. So is 6 or 7 too much? Yeah, 6 or 7 is way too much. You don't need 6 or 7 paragraphs. 3 is a nice level. Okay, what will we learn next week and how can we get these slides to revise? So basically, I'm thinking of speaking to Mrs. Siddiqui because a lot of people have asked me for these slides. And at the minute, we don't send them out. These sessions are recorded and on YouTube, though. And I'm pretty sure Mr. Siddiqui does record them on Zoom. So I'm asking him about that this week to see if there's a place you can all watch them other than YouTube. But currently, they are on YouTube if you want to go find them and take notes from them. Okay, language paper 1. So this was a question about. Well, I'm gonna have to reread your question. I'm so sorry. Click on my answer and then use the topic of the actual answer. Oh, so this was question 5. This was the creative writing one. Well, in creative writing, you tend to get a picture or a sort of inspiration, starter, I guess. The way that I would deal with question 5 in creative writing is, I mean, very similar to kind of what you said. I think you can do that in terms of using the topic as the actual answer, because you should tie it directly to what was given to you in the question. The tighter you are to that question, the better, because it shows that you're actually directly answering the question that was given. I don't think it would limit you in any way. I don't think it would cap your grade. Can I put the homework back on? Yeah, sorry. Okay. You said you received the mark score story, but you struggled adding grade 9 vocab, which is one of my feedback points because I don't know if that makes sense in context. Please add them in and send me it. Yeah, I can. I might have some free time this week. Yeah, you have to remind me though. In terms of like grade 9 vocab, the best thing you can do is just practice, like learning if they're relevant or not in terms of like grammar, if they fit grammatically. Okay, I get what you're saying. This is a gray area in English language because yes, you have to be relevant. Like if it's a story about a dog, you could write about a haunted house, but the dog has to be part of the story. You can't just not mention the dog at all, even if you wrote a first beautiful paragraph about it. If it's not relevant to the story, I mean, yeah, then you're going to be capped on marks because they're marking you on your ability to stick to and answer the question. So if the dog is not relevant in any way to the rest of your story, well, then you've not really answered the question. However, if the focus is the haunted house, but the dog still has a pivotal role in the story or is somewhat relevant to the story, that's fine. So it is a bit of a grey area. It is a bit of a wishy-washy explanation, but that is just the way that it is. Like, the dog has to be somewhat relevant to the rest of the story. You can't just not mention it ever again after that first paragraph. It has to be of some relevance to the rest of the story. But there is free reign. Like, you don't have to be rigid. Like, every single paragraph doesn't have to be directly linked or about the dog, for example. You can stray, but the dog still has to play some role. Even if it's minor, it still has to somewhat be relevant. I mean, in terms of getting marks, the examiners are more testing your ability, testing what you write, so how you write rather than what you write. So you would still score relatively highly because they're not like, oh, you've not talked about the dog for the rest of it. We're going to cap your marks. It's more like, We'll cap it a little bit because you've not directly answered the question, but you would still get marks because they're testing how you've written, not what you've written. So if you've written like a grade 9 story, but not mentioned the dog in the rest of it, well, they'll probably cap you at a grade 7, something like that. Maybe they won't cap you that much. I'm sorry that was really wishy-washy, but that kind of is just the truth. Yeah, that would work. So if it was like a story about a haunted house, but then the dog was important, like the dog helped them in some way. That yeah, that's perfect. Like that's the fine line between it because you've mentioned the dog and it's relevant, it's important to the story. Okay, right. If there's no more questions, I'll let you all go. Have a nice week, everybody. Yeah, have a nice week. Hope you all, yeah, have a nice time doing what you're doing. Um, right. See you later, guys. See you next week where we start doing some inspector calls. So we can